Our next speaker is Mr. Jason McNamara, and he is the Chief of Staff for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Homeland Security. Mr. McNamara was most recently an Associate Vice President and Director of Emergency Management, Homeland Security for Dewberry and Davis, which is headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia. His career spans more than 15 years of experience in emergency management, legislation, policy planning, and operations. Previously, Mr. McNamara served as a professional staff member of the U.S. House Select Committee on Homeland Security and led the Democratic staff efforts for the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness and Response. At Science Applications International Corporation, or SAIC, he was the Deputy Division Manager for their Readiness and Response Division. Prior to joining SAIC in 2001, Mr. McNamara served as the Acting Chief of the Interagency and Catastrophic Planning Section at FEMA, and he managed the day-to-day federal response planning activities with all federal response plan signatory agencies. He also served in a leading role in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th and the agency liaison officer to the U.S. Capitol Police Board in response to the anthrax attack on the United States Senate. So you can see that Mr. McNamara has quite a relationship with these catastrophes and quite an experience in dealing with them. Throughout his career at FEMA, Mr. McNamara participated in planning, execution, and evaluation of FEMA-sponsored disaster exercises and actual emergency response operations. Mr. McNamara holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Psychology from Johns Hopkins University and a Master of Arts in Urban Affairs and Public Policy from the University of Delaware. Please join me in welcoming Mr. McNamara.
Every time I hear that bio, I realize I have to update a bunch of things. It's been 20 years now. I try not to tell people that because I don't want people to know how old I am. I want to make a few points. Hi, Mike. I see this guy in a while. Make a few points this morning. Thanks all for being here. Thanks for having me. I'm here on behalf of the administrator, Craig Fugate. We've now been trying to lead and hopefully leading well FEMA for the past 3.5 years. And then we'll see where we go from here because I believe there's an election this year. Somebody told me that was going on. But to be honest with you, from our perspective, that's not a high priority item. Those of you that know Craig, those of you who know me, politics is probably the least of the things that we worry about at FEMA these days. It's much more about the mission, about serving the survivors, making sure that they have tools like the flood insurance program to protect themselves from risk. And we'll continue to do that for as long as the voters will allow us, or the president, whoever that may be, will allow us to do that. Couple things. One is, I don't need to tell you that flooding is probably the most costly disaster that we have in the country. Our efforts to mitigate against floods, our efforts to bolster this program are a critical component of what we do at FEMA and what we do at the Department of Homeland Security. DHS is not just all about terrorism. I think it was for a while, but that has changed significantly. Many of the measures that we have related to mitigation in terms of our performance are now in lockstep with the flood insurance program. How many policies are in force? How many maps have been completed? What kind of risk do we see out there? So I just want you to understand that when you hear about DHS, you hear a lot about terrorism, the threat of terrorism, the consequences of terrorism. But please understand that the natural risk, and particularly the flood hazard risk, is something that the Secretary thinks about, and something that Craig thinks about every day. So we are much higher up, I think, on the priority list than we have been in the past, and that's due to your efforts. Some of you are probably also aware that the NFIP is rapidly approaching the end of its current authorization. Nobody out here knows that, right? This isn't breaking news, right? So then that's on May 31st. And the next day, two things will occur. We're not going to have any authority to issue any new policies, and hurricane season will start. That is called a political window of opportunity. So in taking that opportunity, one of the things we did, and you all should have seen this, if not, it's readily available. The administrator wrote definitely, his most strongly worded and forceful letter to Congress that we have written in the 3 years that we have been running the agency, which basically said, we understand you're working on packages, and we understand you have some ideas about flood insurance reform. However, the fact that we are once again in the situation of not understanding whether or not, and you, as the companies and the people that support this program, are not aware or not assured this program will be reauthorized, is unacceptable. And therefore, we would like to see, at a minimum, a 2-year reauthorization, not a short-term reauthorization. We would like to work with you in the future on many of the reform things that you in the Congress, you in the industry have proposed. But at this point, the erosion of confidence in the policyholders, in those of you who support this program, is just unacceptable. So we laid out the consequences of not reauthorizing this program. We can't issue new policies. We can't modify existing policies. We can't complete mortgage transactions. That's 1,300 sales a day, or 40,000 closings a month. We would have to potentially halt payment of claims for the recent events. We're still paying out claims for Irene, which occurred at the end of last year. We might have to halt payments for those claims. And then finally, the Disaster Relief Fund will have to bear the costs of any disaster during this hiatus. Now, let's talk about the Disaster Relief Fund for a second. In the past, and I'm guilty of this because many of you know I was a FEMA career employee in the 90s, in the past the Disaster Relief Fund has been seen as kind of the bottomless pit. It will always get refilled. Something bad happens, Congress will do a supplemental, we'll get extra money. They're never going to let that go down. Well, guess what happened this year? We got down to about $50 million in the Disaster Relief Fund at the end of the fiscal year. That has never happened. Never happened in the history of FEMA. What that meant is that number one was there was a potential we could go below zero, and that we would not be able to pay out any claims to disaster. We had a very good chief financial officer who has since left and gone to OMB. I hang him in effigy in my office. But he figured out how to get us in a glide path down to September 30th and make sure that we did not go to zero. But that's no way to run a railroad, particularly when tomorrow we could have a catastrophic earthquake in California and spend $1 billion in an hour. So what we have done as a result of the Budget Control Act and a number of other things is to really make the Disaster Relief Fund a budget, a real annual budget. Now, can it carry over money? Yes, it can still carry over money. But literally, unless the middle of the country falls into the center of the earth from a New Madrid earthquake, I do not expect Congress to give us a supplemental appropriation. And what that means is we have to manage the resources we have. And this year they gave us about $7 billion to manage past disasters and anything that happens in the future. We can do that, but we can't do that if we believe that will be refilled automatically. And we also can't do that if programs that we depend on as backstops and as mitigation against large-scale hazards like the National Flood Insurance Program are not in effect. So our main point is, while I realize that there are a number of reforms out there that are important to you, that are important to Congress, and important to constituents, our main point is this program cannot lapse, and this program needs to build stability. And we will continue to fight for that. One point about Congress, and as you heard in my bio, I worked in both the Senate and the House. I was lucky enough to do that. I was also lucky enough to do that during a time when you could actually get something done in Congress. And I say this with a little bit of sadness, frankly. The way that your companies, that the administration, and that other stakeholders have negotiated with Congress in the past is a different game these days. Holding out for particular provisions, for particular ideas, for particular policy approaches with this Congress is a dangerous game, in my opinion. Because in the absence of consensus, in the absence of hearing from the vast majority of stakeholders about a particular program that they want to go in a particular direction, this Congress will do nothing. And that is not a reflection on either party from my part or a political statement. It is, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, reality. So I would ask you very hopefully and strongly to support our efforts to obtain the longer-term reauthorization that we are seeking, to work with us after we receive that authorization to get the reforms done that we know are needed and must be done. And we are more than willing, as you've seen over the past 2 years, to work with everybody who has an interest in this program to make it a better program for the future. And one of the first things out of the box we did was do the stakeholder, the interest groups, the listening sessions, to pull together what I believe to be one of the most innovative approaches and innovative looks at this program, or frankly any program in FEMA in a long, long time. That's why the administrator gave the project team an award. This was groundbreaking, and we could make real progress in this program and real changes to this program. But we can't do it if we go through a series of 30, 90, or 6 months reauthorizations, because all we talk about at that point is the kind of the D-Day in the end. So again, happy to talk to any or all of you about this, but would like to get some stability in this program so we can all implement the reforms that we would like. Last thing is, as I said, I believe there's an election coming up. Those of you that work on the maps and those of you that work the public relations angles of this, or the congressional relations angles of this, will notice that very soon we will get caught up in a series of arguments about whether or not maps are accurate, whether or not people's rates should or should not go up. I know you're shocked to hear that. But you will see a spike at this point in time because certain folks are trying to get reelected. And this is frankly a very, very easy issue to use with your constituents to show that you are being responsive and that you're beating up on the big bad government. They may be right, they may be correct, we may have screwed up, we may have poor maps, but we will spend quite a lot of time this summer fighting back challenges to map implementation or particular findings of maps, which again speaks to the point I had before, which is we would very much like to be stable in terms of a reauthorization, in terms of an ability to have some space to work out the reform proposals for this program that we know you all want and that we support. Again, I'll be here for the rest of the day. I'm happy to talk to anyone. I appreciate what you do. Craig appreciates what you do. This is a program that is critical for the safety of the nation and the safety of individuals and individual homeowners and the stability of the country. Thanks for everything you do. Have a great conference.